Okay, so we're resuming after a break because I was on vacation traveling in Europe. Um, so we were, the last one that I read was the story of Bharata and Bharata's rebirth as a deer and then rebirth as a human. Um, and we were in the in the conversation between they call him Jata Bharata because his name isn't Bharata, but since that was the name given to him 2 lives ago, but the same Jiva that was Bharata, talking to the Raja Rahugana, who had been abusing him originally, and is now apologetic and reforming and asking him questions upon realizing his error. Um, so I will start. Let's see. I think let's start with Discourse 13 in Book 5. On Bharata allegorically represents this state of worldly existence as a forest to resolve the doubts of Rahugana. The Brahmana, Jata Bharata, began again. Put on the path, the end of which is difficult to attain, by Maya, and devoted to activities, divided into various categories according as they are dominated by the qualities of sattva, rajas, and tamas. This company of merchants, ranging everywhere with the object of acquiring wealth, enters the forest of mundane existence, where it finds no delight. This company of merchants is a metaphor for the jivas that pass looking for wealth and material gain into the world. In that forest, O ruler of men, there are 6 highwaymen who rob this company, led by an unworthy chief. And finding access to their camp, jackals drag away an unwary member of the company, even as wolves carry away a strayed sheep. Harassed by cruel gnats and mosquitoes, in a place dense with numerous creepers, grass, and shrubs, they witness here an imaginary city in the sky, while at other places they behold a fleeting ogre appearing like a firebrand. Looking upon a habitat, water, and wealth as their own, they run about here and there in the forest, O Rahugana, while at some places they cannot distinguish the quarters, smoky with the dust raised by a whirlwind, their eyes being blinded with dust. The notes of unseen crickets jarring upon their ears and their mind disquieted with the hooting of owls, they betake themselves to unholy trees when oppressed with hunger, while at some places they run after a mirage. Here they march towards streams without water, and when starving, they seek food from one another. There they meet with a forest conflagration and get scorched with fire, while at a third place they give way to despair when about to be killed by yakshas. When dispossessed of their wealth by heroic men, heroic in this case meaning strong men, like brigands, highway robbers, they feel depressed in spirits. Grieving and getting confused, they faint away. And entering an imaginary city somewhere, they rejoice for an hour or so, as though happy. Desirous of climbing up a hill, they sometimes proceed in that direction to some distance, but their feet being pierced with thorns and gravel, they sit down, like one sad at heart. Burdened with a large family and tormented with hunger, they indeed get angry every moment with their own people. Cast in the forest now and devoured by a serpent belonging to the species known as the boa constrictor, they have no consciousness left in them, and now bitten by poisonous creatures and falling in some covered well, deprived of their sight, remain lying down there in darkness. Sometimes seeking after honey, they are tormented by bees and feel frustrated in their attempt. If they achieve success in that direction with great hardship, others forcibly rob them of the booty, and yet others snatch away the prize. And at some places they are unable to ward off cold, the sun, storm, and rain, and sit down helpless, while elsewhere they sell between themselves whatever commodity they have with them and make enemies of one another, on the contrary, because of their greed. On some occasions, when impoverished and deprived of a bed, a mat, etc., to squat on, a dwelling and conveyance in that forest, they ask these of another, but on failing to secure the desired object, they cast a wistful look on others' property and incur ignominy. In spite of their feeling of animosity having been aggravated by their attraction for one another's wealth, they enter into marital relations with one another, and while sporting along this road, are reduced to a miserable condition through great many hardships, monetary losses, and other calamities. Leaving behind all their deceased companions at different stages of their journey and taking with them every newborn babe, the company marches onward and onward. None of this company have returned to this day, O brave monarch, nor does anyone take to yoga, leading to the extremity of the road. So in other words, none of them get out in either direction, so to speak. None of them come back the way they came, nor do any of them follow the path of yoga to the end and break free of samsara. Even heroes who have completely subdued the great elephants guarding the quarters as well as the 4 intervening corners, all bite the dust on the field of battle, having contracted confirmed hostility with one another for the sake of dominion over the earth, claiming it as their own. None of them, however, attains the goal which is reached by the recluse, who is free from enmity. Clinging to the arms of creepers and full of longing for sweetly warbling birds perched on them, they get strongly attached to some place. And sometimes afraid of tigers, they make friends here with cranes, herons, and vultures. Betrayed by them, they seek to join a flock of swans, but not finding their behavior to their liking, they approach monkeys. And their senses being fully gratified with the amorous sports natural to that race, each pair gets so absorbed in looking at each other's face that they forget even their death, even their fast approaching death. Seeking delight in trees and fond of sons and wife, they are impatient with the animal desire for sexual indulgence and powerless to get rid of their bondage. When falling into some ravine through inadvertence, this company catches hold of some creeper and remains suspended by it, afraid of the elephant below. Somehow extricated from this calamity, however, he joins the company once more, a chastiser of foes. No one put on this track by Maya, and wandering, is able to cognize the supreme object of life even to this day. You too have been put on this track, O Rahugana. Completely abjuring violence and making friends with all living beings, take up the sword of wisdom, sharpened with the worship of Srihari, and with a mind unattached to the pleasures of sense, get to the end of this road. The Raja said, "Oh, human birth is the best of all incarnations. Of what avail are the births of the highest order in heaven, where the fellowship of exalted souls, whose mind has been purified by the glories of Lord Vishnu, the ruler of the senses, is not had in abundance? It is no wonder that unalloyed devotion to Lord Vishnu, who is beyond sense perception, should spring up in a man whose sins have been scoured off with the dust of your lotus feet, when I find that my ignorance, which had its root in fallacious reasoning, has been rooted out by an hour's fellowship with you. Hail to the Brahmanas who are advanced in age. Hail to infants. Hail to the young. Hail to all down to the youngsters. May Rajas receive blessings from those Brahmanas who traverse the earth in the garb of ascetics that have shaken off all worldly feeling and obligations." Sri Shuka resumed, "O son of Uttara," by which he of course means Parikshit, "having thus explained the true nature of the self out of supreme compassion to the ruler of the Sindhu territory, even though he had slighted the Brahmana, that son of a Brahmana sage who possessed the highest glory and whose feet were adored by Rahugana in a pathetic way, roamed about the earth like an ocean which is full on every side, with a mind whose waves in the form of the Indriyas had been stilled. Having fully realized the true nature of the Supreme Spirit as taught by that saintly soul, Rahugana, the lord of the Sauvira territory, too shed the wrong notion planted on his mind by ignorance, that he was the body. Such, O king, is the greatness of those who have taken shelter with the devotees of the Lord." The Raja Parikshit said, "The course of transmigration of embodied souls that has been described by you in the form of an allegory, a great devotee possessed of varied knowledge, has been fancifully conceived of by the inventive genius of a wise man, and it cannot be readily and clearly understood by untrained minds. Therefore, point out the hidden meaning by bringing out the corresponding ideas." And thus ends the 13th discourse in Book 5 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 14, Dada Bharata elucidates the meaning of the allegory. Sri Shuka said, the 6 indriyas, meaning the 5 senses of perception and the mind, are the only media of going through the beginningless metempsychosis in the shape of being united with and torn away from, as well as of undergoing the pleasurable and painful experiences of a series of bodies brought into existence by virtuous, sinful, and mixed actions, prompted by sattva and other gunas, on the part of human souls looking upon the body as their very self. Lured by these into the aforesaid track, which is as difficult to tread as a mountain defile, meaning like a chasm or crag on a mountainside, and swayed by Maya, functioning under the control of the all-powerful Lord Vishnu, the multitude of embodied souls mentioned heretofore, like a company of traders intent on amassing wealth, enters the forest of worldly existence, which is most inauspicious, like a crematorium, and where they reap by crematorium, of course, it would mean an old-style Indian cremation ground, like a shamshan, and where they reap the fruit of actions wrought with their own body. And even though their endeavors prove abortive and are impeded by many an obstacle, they fail even to this day to get to the path of those who resort like the honeybee to the lotus feet of Sri Hari in the form of their preceptor, the path which relieves the agonies experienced in that forest, where dwell the aforesaid 6, which, though Indriyas by name, are actually robbers by action. For whatever fortune, acquired with great hardship, belongs to a man, is of use only when it is directly conducive to dharma, and that is dharma which consists in the worship of the Supreme Person himself, and it is such dharma that the wise declare as contributory to happiness in the other world. In the case of those who are guided by a perverted intellect and whose mind has not been subdued, as in the case of a company of traders led by an unworthy chief and having an unsubdued spirit, the Indriyas take away that wealth which is fit to be devoted to such virtue through the medium of sensuous enjoyment at home in the form of seeing, touching, hearing, tasting, smelling, seeking after, and determining the nature of various objects. Nay, in that forest, members of their family, wife and children by name, but really wolves and jackals by action, snatch away before their very eyes the wealth of those stingy householders, unwilling though they are to part with their wealth which is being jealously guarded, even as a lamb by shepherds. Just as a field, in spite of its being plowed every year, grows dense, as it were, with shrubs, grass, and creepers at the time of sowing seeds again, the next year, meaning, in cases where the seeds have not been burnt, so is the case with the life of a householder, a field for sowing the seeds of actions, where actions never come to an end, because all actions sow the seeds of more actions. For this stage of life is a storehouse of desires. In the aforesaid stage of life, their wealth is squeezed by men, vile as gnats and mosquitoes, as well as by locusts, birds, thieves, rats, and so on. Now, sauntering on the aforementioned road, with a mind corrupted by ignorance, desire, and actions, they erroneously regard this mortal world, which is as unreal as an imaginary city, as real. Again, on that road, they pursue sometimes the mirage-like pleasures of sense, fondly addicted as they are to the vicious habits of eating, drinking, copulation, and so on. Now, even as one tormented with a longing to get fire may pursue ignis fatuus, ignis fatuus means like, literally it means like fairy fire in Latin, but it refers to like a will-o'-the-wisp in the forest, like false lights caused by like marsh gases and things like that. They run after gold, the excreta of fire and the abode of all evils, their mind being swayed by the quality of rajas, which is of the same color as gold and therefore bears a natural affinity to it. Again, that's an interesting remark about rajas tending toward the love of gold because of its color. Again, sometimes, with their thought centered on their dwelling, water, wealth, and other things essential to life, they run about here and there in the forest of worldly existence. And now placed on the lap by a young woman throwing dust in their eyes like a whirlwind, and steeped as it were in ignorance due to the element of rajas prevailing at the time, they abandon the path of the virtuous. And their reason being entirely clouded with passion, they, like one whose eyes are blinded with dust, no longer perceive the deities presiding over the quarters. Sometimes, in spite of their having spontaneously realized, but for a moment, the illusory nature of sense objects, they are deprived of their reason by identifying themselves with the body. And guided by the same, they again run after those very objects, which are as deceptive and tantalizing as a mirage. Now their ears and heart are extremely tormented by the threats of enemies and the royal court, conveyed in the sternest spirit and with an overbearing demeanor before their very eyes, like the hooting of owls, and behind their back, like the notes of the cricket. This referring to the essentially the oppression of government or authorities on the one hand, and by the oppression of criminals or just enemies or other citizens on the other hand. When they have exhausted their merit earned in previous existences, and are themselves reduced to a dying state, though living, they seek the protection of men whose wealth is of no use either here or hereafter, and who resemble accursed trees and creepers like the karaskara and kakatunda. Those are two species of poisonous trees. When they earlier said accursed or unholy trees, it means trees that are forbidden to eat from because they are poisonous. And wells containing poisonous water and are as good as dead though living. On some occasion, their mind being perverted through close association with vile men, they embrace a heretic creed which entails misery both here and hereafter, like slipping into a waterless stream. When no food is forthcoming for themselves, even through persecution of others, they indeed proceed to devour their own father or sons, or those who are in possession of a straw belonging to these. Now reaching their home, divested of agreeable objects and attended with miseries like a forest conflagration, they are scorched with the fire of grief and give way to extreme despondency, sometimes robbed of their very life in the form of wealth, which is most dear to them, by the demon in the form of a king's household, angered by times. So referring to if hard times come upon the land, the local Raja might just appropriate all of their wealth. They appear quite dead, destitute as they are of all symptoms of liveliness. Now, recognizing to be real their deceased father, grandfather, and so on as appearing in fancy, they experience joy like that in a dream. Sometimes, eager to carry out the huge mountain-like volume of precepts relating to household duties, they are distracted by worldly calamities and feel miserable like one entering a stretch of land full of thorns and sharp-edged gravels. Now, with their energy sapped by hunger, which is hard to bear, or literally with their energy sapped by the gastral fire, which is hard to bear, they vent their anger on their own people, again caught in the grip of a boa constrictor in the shape of sleep and steeped in ignorance. They remain lying down, cast off like a dead body in a lonely forest and unconscious of everything else. Sometimes on their teeth in the form of pride being crushed by biting animals in the shape of wicked men, they are unable to get a wink of sleep, and their consciousness getting fainter and fainter because of a distressed heart, they fall like a blind man into a covered well. Now, when seeking after small drops of honey in the form of sensuous enjoyment and laying their hands on another's wife and property, they are killed by the king or by the husband or owner. They descend into the abysmal hell. Therefore, the wise speak of action in both forms on this path as a field bearing to the jiva mundane existence in quick succession without fail. If they escape from bondage, a Devadatta snatches away from them the woman and property seized by them, and from the said Devadatta, a Vishnumitra arrests them. These are just random names of people, hypothetical names of this man or that man. In this way, the objects of enjoyment never stay, and sometimes unable to ward off cold wind and many other situations brought about by divine will or other created beings, or related to one's own body or mind, they remain cast down with anxiety difficult to get rid of. Now, carrying on business transactions on a very small scale with those of their own company, or snatching from others even 20 calories or any amount, they incur hatred due to their grabbing nature. They are on this path of there are on this path These and other obstacles too, such as joy and sorrow, likes and dislikes, fear and pride, error and insanity, grief and infatuation, greed and spite, jealousy and ignominy, hunger and thirst, worries and ailments, birth, old age, and death. Sometimes folded by woman who is the Lord's deluding potency in her arms, like a pair of creepers, they are deprived of their discriminating wisdom, and anxious at heart to build a pleasure house for her, and lured by the words, glances, and gestures of their sons, daughters, daughters-in-law, brought together under her protection, these men of uncontrolled mind hurl themselves into the bottomless and dark hell. Now their heart is filled, in cases like this, we're not talking about any kind of literal hell like Naraka, afterlife. We're talking about into a miserable life, hell as an inner experience. Now their heart is filled with terror at the thought of the discus of the almighty Lord Vishnu, manifested in the form of the ever-wakeful time, from the minutest point to the period covering 2 pararthas. Pararthas are, of course, halves of the life of Brahma, which sweeps away all created beings while they keep looking on, from Brahma to the clump of grass, by means of its quick movement, representing the passage of time. Nevertheless, they ignore that very almighty Lord, who is no other than the deity presiding over sacrifices, and wields the wheel of time as his own weapon, and betake themselves to the deities worshipped by heretics and discarded by Vedic tradition, deities who are no better than buzzards, vultures, herons, and quails, on the authority of the sacred works of heretics. When they are grossly betrayed by those self-deluded heretics, they take up their residence with the Brahmana race, but not liking their way, such as investiture with the sacred thread and the worship of Lord Vishnu, through the performance of rituals enjoined by the Vedas and the Smriti texts, they join the Shudra community, who, like the monkey race, get paired and maintain their families by a recourse to what is regarded as impurity when judged from the standard of right conduct as laid down in the Vedas. Indulging in unrestrained license there too, they feel sorely distressed in mind and remain engrossed in vulgar pursuits, such as looking at the face of their wife and vice versa, forget death. Sometimes, seeking delight in the household life, which, like trees, serves their worldly interests alone, they conceive fondness for their sons and wife and find pleasure, like the monkey race, in coition, meaning in sex. Thus experiencing joy and sorrow on the way, they fall into adversity in the form of ailments and so on, fearful as a ravine, meaning falling into adversity is as frightful or as dangerous as falling into a sudden ravine in the forest, and remain in terror of the elephant in the form of death. Now, unable to counteract manifold unpleasant experiences, such as cold, wind, and so on, brought about by divine agency, or by any other being, or those relating to one's own body or mind, they are worried with innumerable objects of sense. Sometimes entering into business dealings with their own fellow men, they secure some wealth through stinginess. Now reduced to poverty and deprived of enjoyments in the shape of a bed, a mat to squat on, food to eat, and other such things, they make up their mind to attain the objects of desire when denied to them by foul means such as theft, and meet with ignominy and so on at the hands of people. In this way, though their feeling of enmity is enhanced through attraction with wealth, they enter into matrimonial alliances with one another and subsequently dissolve them according to the tendencies of their past lives. If anyone, afflicted with manifold agonies and obstacles, meets with a calamity or dies on this road, others, as is well known, leave him wherever he is, and taking every newborn child, give way to grief, infatuation, and fear, quarrel, cry, are transported with joy, sing, and are bound. With the exception of pious souls, this company of men, however, never returns even to this day, to the point whence this road commences, and which the learned declare as the end of the road. So that the start of the road and the end are the same place. The aforesaid men do not take to the discipline of yoga, nor do they attain the supreme state, which is easily attained by sages who have shed violence, who are naturally given to self-control, and who have withdrawn their mind from all worldly objects. Nor do the Rajarishis, the royal sages, who have conquered the elephants guarding the quarters as well as the 4 intervening corners, and who perform sacrifices, listen to this teaching. They would rather bite the dust in battle, on the very earth for whose sake they entered into enmity with others, accounting it as their own, and which they ultimately had to abandon, themselves withdrawing in death. Then, clinging to the creeper of karma and somehow rid of the hellish tortures in the shape of ailments and other troubles, they revert to the path of transmigration as aforesaid, and rejoin the company of men. And similar is the case with those who have risen above to the higher regions like Svargaloka. Thus do they sing of Bharata's career. No king can follow even mentally the example of the high-souled Rajarishi Bharata, the son of Lord Rishabha, any more than a fly can think of emulating the speed of Garuda. Full of longing for the Lord of excellent renown, he abandoned while still young, wife and sons, kinsmen and kingdom, difficult to renounce and delightful to the heart, even as one would throw away excrement. He did not long for the earth, sons, kinsfolk, riches, and wife, so hard to renounce, nor even for Sri, who, though coveted by the foremost gods, cast her gracious look on him. In this case, of course, we mean Sri as in fortune and wealth. This was as it should be, for in the eyes of exalted souls whose mind is devoted to the service of Lord Vishnu, or Lord Madhusudana, even liberation is of no value. Hail to Lord Sri Hari, who is Yajna, the defender of righteousness, punctiliously carrying out the injunctions of scriptures, an embodiment of yoga, and the principal theme of Sankhya, the Lord of Prakriti, the ruler of all jivas. Thus did he loudly and distinctly pray, even before casting off the form of a deer. Whosoever repeatedly listens to or recites and celebrates this story of the Rajarishi Bharata, whose spotless virtues and actions are extolled by devotees of the Lord, a story which brings good fortune and confers longevity, wealth, celebrity, heavenly bliss, and even final beatitude or moksha, attains all his desired objects by himself and seeks nothing from others. Thus ends the 14th discourse entitled The Allegorical Meaning Elucidated, forming part of the story of Bharata in Book 5 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 15, an account of Priyavrata's posterity continued. Since the reason that the Shuka even got into talking about Bharata was that he was going down the lineage of the kings who came after Priyavrata, one of whom was Bharata. So Sri Shuka resumed his genealogical history. We have already spoken about the eldest son of Emperor Bharata, Sumati by name, who followed in the footsteps of Lord Rishabha, in that he lived the life of an ascetic who had shaken off all worldly feeling and obligation, and whom certain heretics, having no respect for Vedic traditions, will set up according to their own perverted intellect in the Kali age as a deity not mentioned in the Vedas. A son, Devatajit, was born to him through his wife Vridhasena. Then through Asuri, Devatajit's wife, interesting name also, sprang up his son, Devadyumna. From Devadyumna, through Dhenumati, his wife, was born a son, Parameshti. From the loins of Parameshti, through his wife Suvarchala, was born Pratiha, who, having taught self-knowledge and himself thoroughly purified, realized the Supreme Person as his own self. From Pratiha, through his wife Suvarchala, interesting. So his wife had the same name as his mother, by coincidence, sprang up 3 sons, Pratiharta and so on. The other 2 were called Prastota and Udgata, all 3 of whom were well versed in yajnas. And from the eldest, Pratiharta, through his wife Stuti, were born 2 sons, Aja and Bhuma. From Bhuma, through his wife Rishikulya, sprang up Udgita. From Udgita, through his wife Devakulya, was born Prastava. From Prastava, through his wife Nyutsa, sprang up his son Vibhu. From Vibhu again, through his wife Rati, followed Pratusena. From Pratusena, through his wife Akuti, was born Nakta. And from Nakta sprang up the illustrious Gaya, son of Druti. So his Nakta's wife was Druti, and they had the son Gaya, the foremost among Raja Rishis and a ray of Lord Vishnu himself, who has assumed the quality of Sattva with intent to protect the universe. Gaya, who attained to the rank of an exalted soul by virtue of self-possession and other attributes. He had his mind repeatedly chastened and rendered extremely pure through his own duty, in the shape of looking after, providing with means of subsistence, humoring, treating with tenderness, and admonishing the people, and undertaking sacrifices and other pious acts in a spirit of complete dedication to Lord Vishnu, who is higher than the highest and no other than the infinite Brahman, which had rendered it, his mind, capable of yielding the highest results, meaning moksha, as well as through the habit of devotion to the Lord, acquired by constantly adoring the feet of those who have realized their oneness with Brahman. In that mind of Gaya, which had now been rid of all identification with the body, he realized his oneness with Brahman, the Supreme Spirit, whose presence was felt therein as a matter of course, without any conscious effort on his part. Yet he had no pride in him, and as such he protected the globe. The knowers of the past, those versed in the Pauranika lore, chant the following verses in praise of Gaya. What Raja, other than a part manifestation of the Lord, an Anshavatara of the Lord, could emulate by his deeds Gaya, be he a Yajamana, a high-souled man of extensive knowledge, a defender of righteousness, one who is wooed by the goddess of fortune, meaning one on whom fortune smiles and who is extremely lucky and prosperous, the leader of an assembly of holy men and a servant of pious souls. It was him that the pious daughters of Daksha, whose benedictions always come true, along with rivers, such as the Ganga, sprinkled with water in supreme joy. This refers to a story which I believe is told in one of the other Puranas, maybe the Padma Purana, about the coronation of Gaya, that all the daughters of Daksha and the river devis, like Ganga Devi, Yamuna Devi, and so on, appeared at his coronation to anoint him. And attracted by his virtues, like a cow whose udders began to flow at the sight of her calf, Mother Earth yielded to his subjects all their desired objects, even though he had no desire. The Vedas, as well as the Vedic rites, yielded to him all enjoyments, even though he was free from cravings. Again, honored on the battlefield, kings brought him tributes, while the Brahmanas, when propitiated with righteousness, yielded to him in the other world 1/6 of the blessings. While Indra got inebriate at his sacrificial performance, because of the offerings of soma and wine and so on, where copious libations of the soma were offered, the Lord himself, who was the soul of yajnas, accepted the reward of the sacrifice, duly offered with reverence and in a spirit of pure and unflinching devotion. By propitiating the Lord, the entire creation, from Brahma the creator, down to the other gods, men and the subhuman species of animate life, as well as plants, including the smallest blade of grass, is at once gratified. The self-same Lord, the soul of the universe, who is ever pleased, all blissful by nature, himself felt palpably gratified at the sacrificial performance of Gaya. From Gaya, through his wife Gayanti, sprang up 3 sons, Chitraratha, Sugati, and Avarodhana by name. And from Chitraratha, through his wife Urna, came Samrat. From Samrat, through his wife Utkala, sprang up Marichi, and from Marichi, through his wife Bindumati, Binduman was born, evidently named after his mother. From Binduman, through his wife Saragha, appeared Madhu, a son Madhu by name. From Madhu, through his wife Sumana, sprang up Viravrata, and from Viravrata, through his wife Bhoja, Mantu and Pramantu were born. From Mantu, through his wife Satya, appeared Bhauvana. From Bhauvana, through his wife Dushana, Tvashta was born. From Tvashta, through Virochana, his wife Virochana, came Viraja. From the loins of Viraja through his wife Vishuchi were born 100 sons, the eldest of whom was Shatajit, and a daughter. About Viraja runs the following verse. Viraja the last-born adorned this race of Priyavrata by his glory, even as Lord Vishnu brought glory to the gods. Thus ends the fifth, similarly, by taking birth among the Devas, among the Adityas, as the Vamana avatar. Thus ends the 15th discourse entitled The Posterity of Priyavrata in Book 5 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 16, a description of the terrestrial world. Shuka just finished going through the lineage that Parikshit had asked about. So the king Parikshit then said, "You have described the extent of the terrestrial globe as covering the whole range where the sun shines, and where, on the other hand, the yonder moon with the host of heavenly bodies is visible. Within that very extent are comprised the 7 oceans formed by the 7 furrows dug by the wheels of the chariot of Emperor Priyavrata. And it is to these indeed that you have ascribed, O glorious sage, the division of the earth into 7 distinct dvipas." We talked about this cosmology earlier, when it first went through that. Yeah, the seven lands, the 7 dvipas. I have a desire to know all this in detail, with the extent and characteristic features of each of the dvipas, each of the oceans, and so on. For, focused on the Lord's gross material form, in the shape of the world, the mind becomes fit to be concentrated on the immaterial, most subtle, self-effulgent, and transcendent Brahman, known by the name of Lord Vasudeva. Therefore be pleased to describe the same, O Guru. The sage Sri Shuka replied, "No man, O great king, can ever succeed in ascertaining with his mind, much less in words, the full extent of the vast display of the universe set up by the gunas of the Lord's Maya, even if he strives for a whole lifetime of the gods. Therefore, we propose to discuss at length only the salient features of the terrestrial globe, with the names, position, extent, and characteristics of the various subdivisions." So he's saying, I'm not going to answer your question thoroughly, because, of course, Parikshit at this point only has a few days left to live. And Shuka's like, there's a lot more important stuff to get to. So I'll answer that question in brief. As for this dvipa, the one that they are on, as Parikshit is speaking, also the one that we are on, it represents the innermost of the sheaths of the lotus-like terrestrial globe, with a diameter of 1 lakh yojanas. That's 800,000 miles. So that right there is 10 times, roughly 10 times the diameter of the Earth that we experience today, the spherical planet that we can measure and that we live on. So even the innermost dvipa, the smallest, is 10 times the size of our whole Earth in diameter. So we're clearly referring to a vast, vast otherworldly expanse extending into, it's considered part of Bhumi Loka, but extending into regions of Bhumi Loka that are as if other lokas to us in this yuga. Diameter of 1 lakh yojanas and round like the corolla of a lotus. So like circular. In this dvipa are comprised 9 varshas. Varshas are subdivisions of dvipas. Each 9,000 yojanas, or 72,000 miles in extent. Clearly divided by 8 mountain ranges, which divide the 9 varshas from one another, which form their boundaries. In the middle of these continents stands the inner varsha, called Ilavrata. So if you draw a rough grid of 9, obviously we're not saying that the varshas are precisely rectangular, but if you draw a rough grid of 9, there's going to be one in the middle. The middle one is called Ilavrata Varsha, at the center of which is situated the Raja of all mountains, Meru, or Mount Sumeru, entirely consisting of gold and possessing a height equal to the extent of the Dvipa, meaning 1 lakh yojanas. So this Mount Meru is clearly no mountain of our Earth that we experience today. We're talking about a mountain made of solid gold whose height is like 100 times the height of our Earth planet. It forms the pericarp of the lotus-like terrestrial globe. So the pericarp of the lotus is like the stem in the center. Forms the pericarp of the lotus of the globe and has a diameter of 32,000 yojas, so 256,000 miles at the top and 16,000 yojanas at the foot. So this is interesting. This gets further and further from looking like what we would think of as a mountain. It's twice as wide at the top as it is at the base. So what we're describing here is something shaped like this, with a flat top tapering down at the bottom, made of gold. So clearly nothing that looks exactly like what we would think of as a mountain in our world. With its root lying under the Earth's surface to a depth of 16,000 yojanas. That is to say, the mountain is only 84,000 yojanas high above the Earth's surface, because we're measuring it from the root of the golden structure, and a huge extent of that is underground. To the north of Ilavrata are situated, one after another, the 3 mountain ranges called Nila, Shveta, and Sringavan, severally forming the boundaries of the Varshas, bearing the names of Ramyaka, Hiranmaya, and Kuru, and extending east and west as far as the salt ocean, which surrounds the entire inner Dvipa, called Jambu Dvipa. Each 2,000 yojanas, or 16,000 miles wide. So even these mountain ranges, every little feature is still like larger than our whole Earth. That's the titanic scale of this full extent of Bhumiloka that's being described here. And every exterior range being shorter in length alone by a little over 1/10 of the next interior range. So since we're counting outward from the middle, Nila, Shveta, and Sringavan. So Shveta is exterior to Nila, Sringavan is exterior to Shveta. That's what it's meaning there, as we're going out from Mount Meru toward the salt ocean. They get a little bit smaller. Likewise, to the south of Ilavrata, and extending from east to west, stand the 3 mountain ranges, Nishadha, Hemakuta, and Himalaya, each possessing a height of 10,000 yojanas, or 80,000 miles. That's still like 10 times the height of the diameter of our Earth, and severally marking the boundaries of Harivarsha, Kimpurusha-varsha, and Bharatavarsha. So that's getting toward the Earth of our experience there. The Himalaya border it, which extends into the earthly Himalayas we experience, and getting into Bharatavarsha, which is used sometimes as a name for our whole world, sometimes as a name just for India and some of the surrounding lands of South Asia. Even so, to the west and east of Ilavrata stand the Malyavan mountain range to the west and Gandhamadana to the east, severally extending as far as the Nila mountain to the north and the Nishadha mountain on the south. So they join up with the other mountain ranges. And each of those cover a breadth of 2,000 yojanas, or 16,000 miles. They mark the boundaries of the Varshas called Ketumala on the west and Bhadrashva on the east of Ilavrata Varsha. On the 4 sides of Mount Meru stand the Mandara, Meru Mandara, Suparshva, and Kumunda mountains. So this is inside Ilavrata Varsha, forming its buttresses, as it were, like ranged about the base of where Meru emerges from the earth, and having a length and height of 10,000 yojanas, or 80,000 miles each. On these 4 mountains stand 4 big trees, a giant mango tree on Mount Mandara, a giant jambu or rose apple tree on Meru Mandara, a giant kadamba tree on Mount Suparshva, and a giant banyan tree on Mount Kumuda. Looking like they're flags. And each of these trees possesses a height of 1,100 yojanas, or 8,800 miles. So these trees are still slightly taller than the diameter of our Earth. That's the scale of the trees we're talking about here. And a diameter of their trunk of 100 yojanas, 800 miles at its trunk. And its branches extending within a diameter equal to its height. Near these trees, there are 4 lakes of milk, honey, sugarcane juice, and fresh water. So going around. So Mount Mandara, which has the mango tree, has the lake of milk, and so on. They correspond in the same order. The demigods or races of spirits, the yakshas, kinnaras, and so on, who drink of these lakes, O Parikshit, foremost of the Bharatas, enjoy mystic powers as a natural consequence. They gain their mystic powers by drinking from these lakes. There are also 4 celestial gardens called Nandana, Chaitrarata, Vaibrajaka, and Sarvato Bhadra. You might remember this from the earlier chapter in the Bhagavatam, where we read about during the pleasure journeys of Prajapati Kardama and his wife Devahuti, when they spent 100 years flying around in their celestial palace. They flew over these gardens and these lakes and these mountains. They largely were spending it in Ilavrata Varsha. And so all these places were mentioned as being seen by them. But now we're getting a little bit more of a systematic lay of the land. In these gardens, the foremost of gods, leading a bevy of most charming celestial beauties with them, carry on their sports, their glories being sung by hosts of demigods or hosts of spirits or deities like Gandharvas. From the top of the celestial mango tree, 1,100 yojanas high. So this is interesting because, 1,100 yojanas high. Standing on the bosom of Mount Mandara, drop down fruits as colossal as a mountain peak and luscious as nectar. A river, Arunoda by name, so called because of its carrying as water the most delicious, fragrant, and highly perfumed, abundant, and scarlet juice of these fruits bursting open from their fall. Since, of course, they're falling thousands of miles, so they're going to explode and release a flood of red mango juice when they land, flows from the summit of Mount Mandara and irrigates the eastern part of Ilavrata. The breeze, perfumed by contact with the person of Yakshinis, forming a retinue of the goddess Parvati in that region, surcharges with fragrance the whole area about them for 10 yojanas, 80 miles. So you can, the Yakshinis in this area can be smelled from 80 miles away because of their drinking this water, this celestial river of red mango juice. Similarly, a river, Jambu by name, the Jambu River, Jambu Nadi, emanating from the juice of rose apples of the size of elephants and having very small seeds, burst open as a result of their fall from an exceedingly high level, falls from the summit of Mount Meru Mandara, 10,000 yojanas high on the earth, and waters the whole of Ilavrata, standing to the south of that river. The clay on both the banks of this river getting saturated all over with that juice, that rose apple juice, and undergoing a chemical change under the joint action of the wind and the sun, is transmuted into a high-class gold, known by the name of Jambunada gold, which ever serves to adorn the person of immortals. Indeed, as the tradition unmistakably points out, the gods and other heavenly beings, such as the Gandharvas, along with their spouses, wear this Jambunada gold in the shape of diadems, bangles, girdles, and other ornaments. So that otherworldly river is where their gold is mined from. 5 torrents of honey, each measuring 5 fathoms in diameter, that stream forth from the hollows of that great Kadamba tree, which stands firmly rooted on Mount Suparshva, when falling from the summit of Suparshva, delight with their aroma, Ilavrata lying to the west of those torrents. The breeze surcharged with the odor issuing from the mouth of celestial damsels drinking of those torrents perfumes an area of 100 yojanas, or 800 miles, all around. In the same way, from the boughs of that banyan tree, Shatavalsha by name, which means having hundreds of not exactly vows. Valsha are the roots that banyan trees drop. I'm sure that you're all familiar with banyan trees, how they drop down roots out of their branches that, if they are allowed to, will take root and form additional trunks. So the name Shatavalsha for a banyan tree just means it has hundreds of those, which stands firmly rooted on Mount Kumuda, issues streams all flowing downward to the north and capable of yielding the objects of one's desire, such as milk, curds, honey, clarified butter, jaggery, cereals, and other edibles, as well as raiment, beds, seats, and ornaments. And falling from the summit of Mount Kumuda, benefit the region of Ilavrata lying to the north of that mountain. Afflictions of various kinds, such as wrinkles, gray hair, fatigue, perspiration, foul smell, old age, disease, death, cold and heat, pallor, and other troubles, are never experienced by those created beings that make use of these rivers. Nay, they enjoy the greatest happiness throughout their life. Like filaments surrounding the pericarp of a lotus, there are 20 mountains situated round about Meru, near its foot. Their names are Kuranga, Kurara, Kusumbha, Vaikanka, Trikuta, Shishira, Patanga, Rochaka, Nishadha, Shinivasa, Kapila, Sanka, Vaidurya, Jarudhi, Hansa, Rishabha, Naga, Kalanjara, Narada, and so on. To the east of Meru stand the Jatara and Devakuta mountains, extending north to south to a length of 18,000 yojanas, or 144,000 miles, and possessing a height and width of 2,000 yojanas, or 16,000 miles. So every single object that we have described in this vast otherworldly expanse is larger than our whole Earth, or at least on par with it, like the trees. Similarly, to the west of Mount Meru are situated the Pavana and Pariyatra mountains. To the south stand the Kailasa and Karavira mountains, extending east to west. That is Shiva's Mount Kailasa. And to the north are situated the Trishringa and Makara. Enclosed on all sides by these 8 mountains, Mount Sumeru, the mountain of gold, shines like a sacred fire surrounded by blades of kusha grass. On the summit of Mount Meru, at the very center, they say, is situated the city of Brahma the Self-Born, built of gold, with an area of 14,000 yojanas, or 112,000 square miles, and rectangular in shape. After this model, and round about the same, have been built the 8 cities of the 8 Lokapalas, in a style befitting their master and in the direction allotted to him, each city being 1/4 the size of Brahma city. So around the rim of the top of Mount Meru, there's Indra city to the east, Agni's city to the southeast, Yama's city to the south, Nirti city to the southwest, Varuna to the west, Vayu to the northwest, joint between Soma and Kubera to the north, and Ishana, a form of Shiva, to the northeast. And on the measurement of Brahma city, there's a footnote here by the translators, that it's a compound epithet in Sanskrit. Could be taken on the face of it to mean covering an area of 1,000 times 10,000, i.e. 1 crore square yojanas, or 8 crore square miles, as almost every renowned commentator of Shrimad Bhagavata has done. Considering the extent of Mount Meru, which is mentioned in passage 7 above, is only 32,000 yojanas wide, however, this figure strikes us as enormous, since it gives an area for the city on the top of Mount Meru larger than the area of the top of Mount Meru. Hence, following a learned commentator, we have split the compound word in Sanskrit in a different way and taken it to mean covering an area of 4,000 square miles. Thus interpreted, the compound will mean having an area of 10 plus 4 which tallies exactly with the figure given in the Vishnu Purana. So they're explaining why they interpreted that differently from most of the commentators. And it does seem to match up with Vishnu Purana, though on the other hand, I see no reason why Brahma couldn't have a city on the top of Mount Meru larger in extent than the top of Mount Meru. They're not bound by finite rules of space the way we are, and his city could well be larger on the inside than it is on the outside. So I could see either interpretation being considered there. It's getting close to 10. I'm thinking of stopping here for today. It continues through this elaborate otherworldly cosmology for a great part of the remainder of Book 5 of the Bhagavatam. So what do you think? I could do one more discourse if you want, but
so sorry. You could stop the recording, then we can
yeah,
stop sharing.
I think it might be better to start off with the get into the next part of the cosmological descriptions next time, so we can go more into it.
Yeah.
Let me mark this.